Detective Sarah Chen stared at the grainy doorbell footage on her laptop screen, her coffee growing cold as she replayed the same 30 seconds for the 15th time. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m., and the infrared camera had captured a figure moving across the front porch of 1247 Elm Street with the desperate urgency of someone running from invisible demons. The woman's face was older, weathered by 16 years of whatever hell she'd been living. But those eyes, those distinctive green eyes with the small scar above the left brow, were unmistakable. Sarah had memorized every detail of that face during the sleepless nights that followed the Hartley case, studying photographs until the features burned themselves into her memory. "Impossible," she whispered, though her pulse quickened with a familiar mix of dread and anticipation. The Hartley case had been her first major investigation as a rookie detective in 2008. Baby Emma, just 8 months old, had vanished along with her 19-year-old babysitter, Meredith Kane, on a September night that had haunted Sarah's dreams for over a decade. The scene had been pristine. No signs of struggle, no ransom note, no trace of either victim. Emma's nursery had been undisturbed except for the missing child and the babysitter's purse, which they'd found weeks later in a dumpster 30 miles away, emptied of everything except a single photograph of Meredith with her younger sister. The case had consumed Sarah's early career. She'd interviewed neighbors who'd seen nothing, followed leads that led nowhere, and watched as David Hartley, Emma's father, slowly crumbled under the weight of his daughter's disappearance. His wife, Rebecca, had died in a car accident 2 years later, and Sarah had always wondered if grief had made her careless behind the wheel, or if something darker had been at play. Now, 16 years later, the doorbell camera at 1247 Elm Street, 3 blocks from where the Hartleys once lived, had captured what appeared to be Meredith Kane's ghost. Sarah grabbed her keys and badge, the familiar weight of her service weapon a comfort against her hip. She'd learned long ago that impossible cases were often the most dangerous ones. The suburban house looked identical to thousands of others in Millbrook, but Sarah's trained eye caught the subtle signs of abandonment, overgrown hedges that had once been meticulously maintained, newspapers yellowing on the porch like fallen leaves, mail overflowing from the box in a cascade of bills and advertisements. The lawn was a patchwork of brown and green, evidence of a sprinkler system that had been turned off months ago. She pressed the doorbell, hearing its electronic chime echo through empty rooms. The sound was followed by absolute silence, not even the hum of air conditioning or the tick of a clock. "Mrs. Patterson," she called through the door. Knowing she'd get no response, the homeowner had been in assisted living for 3 months, according to the neighbor who'd called in the doorbell footage. Margaret Patterson, 83, had fallen and broken her hip, and her family had been trying to sell the house ever since. Sarah circled to the back, noting the overgrown garden where tomato plants had gone to seed, and roses bloomed wild and untended. A loose window gave way to her gentle pressure, the old wood frame warped with age and neglect. The house smelled of dust and time, but underneath lay something else, something organic and sharp that made her hand instinctively move to her weapon. The kitchen was a shrine to 1980s decor. Avocado green appliances, wallpaper with tiny flowers, and a linoleum floor that had seen better decades. But it was what sat at the small breakfast table that stopped Sarah in her tracks. The young woman, definitely Meredith, though aged beyond her 35 years, sat slumped over the table, her dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. Her skin had the waxy pallor of death, and a syringe still dangled from her left arm, the needle catching the afternoon light that filtered through dusty curtains. Track marks ran up both arms, but they looked fresh, recent, the desperate puncture wounds of someone who discovered heroin as an escape from unbearable pain. Across from her, in a child-sized chair that seemed grotesquely out of place in the adult kitchen, sat a teenage girl with Emma Hartley's distinctive auburn hair and her father's strong jawline. She was alive, breathing, but her stillness was almost as disturbing as Meredith's corpse. Her clothes were clean but cheap, the kind bought in bulk at discount stores, and her hair had been cut recently, probably by Meredith with kitchen scissors. But it was the girl's eyes that stopped Sarah's breath, vacant, hollow, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard gaze of someone who'd seen too much and learned to retreat deep inside herself for protection. "Emma," Sarah whispered, holstering her weapon and approaching slowly, the way she'd learned to approach wounded animals. "Emma Hartley." The girl's head turned with mechanical precision, but her expression remained eerily blank. When she spoke, her voice carried the careful cadence of someone reciting a well-rehearsed script, each word measured and controlled. "I don't know anyone by that name. My name is Grace Kane. This is my mother, Meredith." She gestured toward the corpse, with the same emotional detachment someone might use to point out a piece of furniture. Sarah felt her heart break a little more. 16 years of psychological conditioning had turned Emma Hartley into someone else entirely, someone who could sit across from a dead body and speak in measured tones about identity and family, as if she were discussing the weather. The medical examiner's preliminary report confirmed what Sarah had suspected. Meredith had died from a heroin overdose, but the track marks on her arms told a story of recent addiction, not long-term use. Her teeth were in good condition. Her body showed no signs of prolonged malnutrition, and her blood work revealed that she'd been relatively healthy until the weeks before her death. "Someone introduced her to this," Dr. Martinez explained, pointing to photographs of the injection sites. "These aren't the marks of someone who's been using for years. This is someone who was desperate, probably trying to self-medicate for psychological pain." "Or someone who was being controlled," Sarah said grimly. "Someone who knew that a dead junkie wouldn't raise questions." Emma, though she insisted on being called Grace, sat in the police station's family room, mechanically eating a sandwich that Sarah had brought her. Every movement was precise, controlled, as if she were afraid of making a mistake. She chewed exactly 15 times before swallowing, took 3 sips of water between bites, and kept her hands folded in her lap when she wasn't eating. "Can you tell me about your life with Meredith?" Sarah asked gently, settling into the chair across from the girl. She'd removed her badge and gun, trying to make herself appear less threatening. "She was my mother," Emma replied, her voice flat and emotionless. "She took care of me. We moved around a lot. She said people wouldn't understand our family." "What kind of people wouldn't understand?" For the first time, a flicker of something real crossed Emma's face. Fear, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. Her hands tightened slightly in her lap, and she glanced toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst through it. "Bad people. People who wanted to hurt us. Meredith said if I ever told anyone about before, they'd come for us." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She said they'd do terrible things to me if they found us." Sarah's heart ached as she recognized the signs of psychological conditioning, the same techniques used by cults and abusive partners to maintain control through fear. Someone had spent 16 years convincing this child that her salvation was actually her imprisonment. "Emma," she said softly, "I knew you when you were a baby. You had parents who loved you very much. They never stopped looking for you." The girl's carefully constructed facade cracked, and for a moment Sarah glimpsed the terrified child beneath the programmed responses. Emma's breathing quickened, and her hands began to shake. "No," she whispered, the word coming out like a sob. "No, that's not true. Meredith saved me. She said she saved me from them. She said they were going to hurt me, and she took me away to keep me safe." Tears began to roll down her cheeks, the first real emotion Sarah had seen from her. She said if I ever went back, they'd know what she did, and they'd kill us both. The breakthrough came when Sarah found Meredith's hidden journal, tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the abandoned house. The notebook was water-stained and worn, filled with pages of cramped handwriting that told a story of gradual realization and growing horror. The entries began in 2008, just weeks after the kidnapping. August 15th, 2008. David says, "It's just for a little while, just until the investigation dies down." He says Rebecca is getting suspicious, asking too many questions about the insurance policy and the gambling debts. He promised me we'd only keep Emma for a few months until he can figure out how to make it look like an accident. But I look at her sleeping in her crib, and I know this is wrong. She's not supposed to be with me. She's supposed to be home with her parents. August 28th, 2008. I tried to call the police today, but David caught me. He showed me the pictures again. What he'll do to Emma if I don't cooperate. He has friends, he says, people who owe him favors, people who won't ask questions if a baby disappears permanently. I can't let that happen to her. December 12th, 2008. Emma's first Christmas away from home. I bought her a stuffed elephant like the one she had before. She holds it when she sleeps, and I pretend it's because she loves it, not because she misses her real parents. David says Rebecca is cracking up, drinking too much, asking questions about me. He says we might have to move again soon. The entries showed Meredith's gradual transformation from reluctant accomplice to protective mother figure. March 3rd, 2010. Emma called me Mama today. It broke my heart. I've been telling her stories about her real parents, but I have to be careful. David has people watching us. He moves us every few months to keep us isolated. Emma doesn't remember her old life, but sometimes she asks questions that make me think she knows something isn't right. June 15th, 2012. Emma is asking about school. All the other kids her age are going to kindergarten, and she wants to know why she can't. I've been homeschooling her with books I steal from libraries, but she's too smart. She knows we're different from other families. David says if she goes to school, someone will ask questions. Someone will recognize her face from the missing posters, November 4th, 2015. Emma asks about her real parents sometimes. I've been telling her they were bad people, like David told me to say. But I see how she looks at other families in the grocery store, and I know she knows something isn't right. She's 12 now, and she's starting to ask harder questions. What if she figures out the truth? January 18th, 2018. David killed Rebecca. He made it look like an accident, but I know it was him. He's getting the insurance money, and he says we can stay hidden forever now. But Emma is 15, and she's not stupid. She's been asking about why we never see other family, why we don't have photographs from when she was little. I'm running out of lies to tell her. The entries became more erratic as the years passed, filled with paranoia and desperation. August 7th, 2022. Emma is 18 now. She wants to get a job, maybe go to college. She doesn't understand why we can't stay in one place, why we can't have normal lives. I want to tell her the truth, but David says if she ever finds out, she'll go to the police, and we'll both end up dead. He's been drinking more, making mistakes. I think he's planning something. March the 14th, 2024. David found us in Phoenix. I don't know how. We've been so careful. He says he's tired of paying to keep us hidden. He says Emma is too old now, too much trouble. He gave me the drugs and told me what to do. If I don't take care of her myself, he'll send his friends to do it. I can't let that happen. June 23rd, 2024. He's getting sloppy, desperate. I think he's planning to get rid of us both. I need to get Emma somewhere safe, but I don't know how. I'm too scared. I've been scared for so long that I don't remember what it feels like to be brave. The final entry was dated just 3 days before Meredith's death. September 8th, 2024. I can't do this anymore. I've destroyed so many lives. Emma deserves better than this. She deserves to know who she really is, to have a real family, to live without fear. I'm going to leave her somewhere safe, and then, I don't know, maybe I'll find the courage to tell the truth before it's too late. If something happens to me, I pray someone finds this and knows what really happened. Tell Emma's real parents that I'm sorry. Tell them I loved her like she was my own. The man they'd been running from was David Hartley, Emma's own father. The evidence had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. The insurance policy he'd taken out on Emma just months before her disappearance, worth $500,000. The gambling debts that had been consuming his paycheck. The affairs that had been destroying his marriage. The desperate need for money that his wife's death in a car accident 2 years later had conveniently provided. Sarah sat in the police station's conference room, surrounded by 16 years of evidence that painted a picture of calculated evil. Bank records showed regular payments to a series of shell companies, money used to keep Meredith and Emma hidden and silent. Phone records revealed a pattern of contact between David and known criminals, men who specialized in making problems disappear. He'd hired Meredith to babysit that night, but not to watch Emma, to take her. Meredith had been 19, naive, and desperately in love with a man who'd promised her the world if she'd just help him with one simple task. By the time she'd realized what she'd been drawn into, it was too late to escape. David Hartley had spent 16 years living off his daughter's life insurance and his wife's death benefits, playing the role of the grieving father while secretly ensuring that Meredith and Emma stayed hidden and silent. He'd moved them from city to city, state to state, always one step ahead of any investigation that might have uncovered the truth. But desperation had made him careless. The heroin that killed Meredith had been laced with fentanyl, a quick, efficient way to eliminate a liability who knew too much. The plan had been to make it look like another overdose, then disappear Emma permanently. But Meredith had been smarter than he'd given her credit for. She'd hidden her journal, left clues, and in her final act of defiance, had led Emma to a place where she would be found. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning at David Hartley's insurance office. He'd built a successful business on the foundation of his daughter's disappearance, using the sympathy and notoriety to attract clients who wanted to work with someone who understood loss. Sarah watched through the two-way mirror as he sat in the interrogation room, still playing the role of the grieving father, even as the evidence mounted against him. He was 58 now, his hair silver, and his face lined with what most people would assume was sorrow, but which Sarah recognized as the weight of 16 years of lies. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said when they presented him with Meredith's journal. "That girl was disturbed. She kidnapped my daughter and filled her head with lies." But his hands were shaking, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. When they showed him the bank records, the phone logs, the trail of evidence that connected him to Meredith's death, his facade finally cracked. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I was in debt to some very bad people. They would have killed me, killed my whole family. I thought if Emma just disappeared for a while, until I could get the insurance money and pay them off." "But it didn't work out that way, did it?" Sarah said coldly. "Because Meredith wasn't as controllable as you thought. Because she grew to love Emma, and you couldn't risk her growing a conscience." David's confession came in pieces, interrupted by tears and justifications and attempts to minimize his role. He'd never intended for it to go on so long, he said. He'd planned to have Emma returned safely once the insurance money came through, but Rebecca had started asking questions, threatening to go to the police, and he'd been forced to act. She was going to destroy everything, he said, of his wife. She was going to take away our second chance at happiness. Sarah wanted to reach across the table and strangle him. Instead, she closed the folder containing 16 years of evidence and stood up. "David Hartley, you're under arrest for the kidnapping of Emma Hartley, the murder of Rebecca Hartley, and the murder of Meredith Kane." Emma's recovery was slow and complicated, like learning to walk again after a devastating injury. She'd spent 16 years believing that her survival depended on forgetting who she really was, and unlearning that conditioning was more difficult than anyone had imagined. Dr. Martinez, the trauma specialist, met with her twice a week in a comfortable office filled with soft chairs and gentle lighting. The sessions were difficult, filled with tears and anger and the slow, painful process of reconstructing a stolen identity. "She's asking about her mother," Dr. Martinez told Sarah during one of their regular updates. "Her real mother. I think she's starting to remember." Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Her mother died when she was 10. Car accident. She never got to know what happened to Emma." "What about other family?" Sarah smiled for the first time in days. "Her mother's sister, Catherine. She's been waiting 16 years for this phone call." The conversation with Catherine Walsh was one of the most difficult Sarah had ever had to make. How do you tell someone that their kidnapped niece has been found, but that her sister was murdered by the very man who'd stolen the child? How do you explain that the girl who'd been missing for 16 years was now a traumatized teenager who barely remembered her own name? Catherine had cried, great heaving sobs that Sarah could hear through the phone, but her first question had been about Emma's well-being. "Is she hurt?" she'd asked. "Is she safe now?" "She's safe," Sarah had promised, "but she's going to need time and patience and a lot of love." "She'll have it," Catherine had said, without hesitation. "She'll have everything she needs." The reunion happened on a Tuesday afternoon in the hospital's family room, a neutral space designed to be comfortable and non-threatening. Catherine Walsh was older now, her hair silver instead of the auburn that matched Emma's, but her eyes held the same warmth that Sarah remembered from the original investigation. Emma approached slowly, clutching a worn photograph that Meredith had kept hidden, a picture of her as a baby with her parents. The resemblance between Emma and Catherine was unmistakable. They had the same bone structure, the same way of tilting their heads when they were thinking. "You look like her," Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You look so much like your mother." Emma's carefully controlled composure finally broke. She collapsed into Catherine's arms, sobbing with 16 years of grief and confusion and desperate hope. Her body shook with the force of emotions she'd kept buried for so long that she'd almost forgotten how to feel them. "I'm sorry," she kept repeating. "I'm so sorry I couldn't come home. I'm sorry I forgot you. I'm sorry Mama died." "Oh, sweetheart," Catherine murmured, holding her close. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You were just a baby. None of this was your fault." They stayed like that for a long time, aunt and niece finding each other across the gulf of lost years. Sarah watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her own face, as she witnessed the beginning of Emma's journey back to herself. 6 months later, Sarah visited Emma at Catherine's house, a cozy colonial in a neighborhood where children rode bicycles and neighbors knew each other's names. Emma was in therapy, working through the trauma and slowly rebuilding her identity, but she was making progress. She'd started school, catching up on the education that had been stolen from her, and she'd made a few tentative friendships with classmates who didn't know her story. "I've been thinking about Meredith," Emma said as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I know what she did was wrong, but she did try to protect me, in her own way." Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of Emma's feelings. People are complicated. Sometimes they do terrible things for reasons they think are right, or because they're scared, or because they don't know how to get out of a situation they never should have been in. "Do you think she would have wanted me to forgive her?" Sarah considered the question carefully, thinking about the journal entries that had revealed Meredith's gradual transformation from reluctant accomplice to protective mother figure. "I think she would have wanted you to find peace, whatever that looks like for you." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, the first Sarah had seen from her. "I think I'm starting to understand what that means." As Sarah drove away, she thought about the strange justice of it all. David Hartley would spend the rest of his life in prison, but his real punishment had been living for 16 years with what he'd done, knowing that his greed and cowardice had destroyed everything he'd claimed to love. Meredith Kane had paid the ultimate price for her part in the crime, but she'd also saved Emma's life in the end by leading her back to the truth. And Emma, brave, resilient Emma, would carry scars from her ordeal, but she was finally free to discover who she really was, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. The doorbell footage that had started it all had captured more than just a face. It had captured a moment of desperate hope, a final act of love from a woman who'd spent 16 years trying to undo the damage she'd helped create. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most profound victories came wrapped in tragedy, but they were victories nonetheless, hard-won and precious for their cost. Emma Hartley was home at last, and that was worth everything.